Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heater, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I have some new friends on the podcast today, and I'm looking forward to digging into this question. We're talking about generational shifts and the future of leadership today. This is a question I definitely have personally spent some time thinking about, but I also think there's so much opportunity for me to learn. So I'm just excited to hear what you guys have to say. But let's start with our round robin introductions. I'll go first. I am Sarah Heater. If you're new here, thanks for being here. I am the host of Big Brave Business, and I'm also a podcast producer and strategic consultant.
I'm Emily Adams from Transformative Leadership, Operations and Leadership Consulting, and excited to have this conversation. Since I was born and raised in the Amish culture, I have a whole other perspective. So happy to be here and having the generational shifts conversation.
Hey, I'm Samantha Fackler. I am a business coach and marketing advisor for women entrepreneurs. And I've spent 13 years working with huge brands like Apple, PayPal, LinkedIn, Absolute Vodka, actually over 100 companies. And I've worked with people, Gen Z. I have team members that are Gen Z. I advise companies where they're older, 60s, 70s people. So yeah, very interested to dig into this too.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited for this conversation as well. My name is Paulaska Ramirez, and I help first generation women thrive beyond their ancestors' dreams.
Okay, so enough said about why the topic's interesting to you. So let's go ahead and open the can of worms, shall we? So the big question we're digging into today is, how are generational shifts reshaping the workforce? And what does this mean for the future of leadership?
One thing I'm seeing is just that the younger generation is more comfortable talking about emotions, talking about even the word trauma is so much more accepted and thrown around now than before. And I think there's a push for culture that is accepting of that and prioritizes mental health and all of those things. But there's also this big question. I think there's like this stigma that Gen Z like doesn't want to work hard, but I don't think that's true. I think there's a desire for flexibility. And so I think it's going to shape more flexible company cultures and working styles.
Yeah, and I think that it's going to really challenge leaders to lead in a new way, because you can no longer lead from we're the leader and we're all the way up at the top, we're on pedestals. It's going to challenge them to bring themselves down off of the pedestal and put us all at like the human level. Instead of seeing employees, now the leaders get to be able to see humans and not just numbers. And I see it just in my boys as well. I've had two teenage boys and they think very differently. And it's not like you mentioned, Samantha, it's not that they don't want to work. It's just they have a different way of working and a different way of learning. So we get to learn as leaders, as this next generation comes in and different generations, how do we continue to lead them and make sure that they grow and evolve too?
Yeah, I would say the cookie cutter style of leading no longer works. And the same thing of like awarding your employees. We're looking at old school of like, I want a raise every so often, and I want this many days, and I want to be able to grow within my organization. And we're looking at the younger generation. I want flexibility. I want a voice. I want mental health days. I want to be able to have access to different services that take care of the full person, which looks very different when employers are like, well, we put into your 401k and we gave you your days, and that's your job to manage that. And here's the direction. And I'm up here, like you were saying, and that's no longer, they want dialogue and a level of creative freedom that even though I'm not here, I want my voice to be heard in order to be part of the process. So I think when we say they don't want to work, they don't want to work under those conditions, but they're willing to bring a lot more to the table if given the opportunity to.
Yeah, I'm curious what for you. I think there's been a lot of discussion so far around Gen Z as like the next generation, but I'm curious, like you personally, with the generation you identify with or the generation you were born into, how does your generation's work ethic shape how you lead?
I personally don't feel like mine has shaped that. I honestly feel like mine has more shaped and evolved from the way I was raised. And the way I was raised is very work hard, but you work 6 days a week. There's no rest, there's no nothing. And as I've gone on this spiritual journey as a leader, I'm like, that's no longer aligned with me because that does not, I can't sustain that. Yeah, I can sit here and work 70, 80 hours a week, but that's not even human. Like I'm not even enjoying life. And then I had to come to the realization of like, how do I work? How do I function? How do I want to, regardless of what my generation is doing? And one of the biggest tools that I have used and that we use with our clients is human design, understanding your human design and how you work. And we encourage leaders to do the same thing for their team. I'm a manifester by human design, so I work very differently than my business partner who's a projector. So it's understanding that Samantha's also a projector. So I don't necessarily think the generation had much like impact on me, but more so like my beliefs and my thoughts, and then what I had to reprogram to
Yeah.
get where I'm at today.
Well, I'm
Mm.
curious about that. So what generation are you?
So millennial
Okay,
or
because
borderline.
so I am also a millennial, and I feel like that is the millennial. Personally, I feel like that is the millennial experience, that we are the generation of reprogramming. I think that we were raised under this pretense that hard work is the way because that's what generations before us saw value in. They built careers around this like white supremacist corporate capitalism where you stay at a company for 15, 20, 30 plus years, you get rewarded for staying with that company and raising through the ranks. My personal millennial experience was that we worked our butts off and we were told hard work is the way. My peer group, we went to school. We not just went to college, but we studied multiple degrees. Like almost all of my friend group, including myself, graduated with multiple degrees. And then when we didn't see the mobility we were getting, we all went back to get master's degrees. Like, all right, I'll keep on proving myself while working full time, right? Willing to work multiple jobs, willing to hustle, willing, because we were told this is what you have to do, sit down, shut up, and work hard. And then at some point, we looked at Gen Z coming up behind us, making more money and doing a lot less. And we are like, what the heck have I been doing all this work for? They're all dropping out of college and starting their own initiatives, right? And like, and here like or younger millennials even, and here the older millennials are like, wait a second, I want what she's having. Like I don't want that for me anymore. And I feel like this has been this generation of like, yes, I think Gen Z is so much more, they have a lot more language around mental health, also neurodiversity, around neurodivergence, around pursuing therapy and other mental health things. That's become standard, but who standardized it, right? I think it was millennials. I think millennials are the generation of like reprogramming. That's how I feel. But I'm curious, like, what do you guys think?
Yeah, agreed. I'm a millennial too. And I think there are two things. One, we saw the financial crisis in '08. And for me, where I'm at in the millennial spectrum is that was around the time I was graduating high school and suddenly had no money for college. My parents were like, sorry, your college fund is non-existent now. So I had to work my ass off to get scholarships and pay my way through. And then I thought, okay, I'm applying that to work. I'm going to work really hard. Similar to what you were saying, work up the chain. But then the online space started to blow up in parallel. And so all of a sudden, all the opportunities starting there, it's like, wait, what is happening? And I think what I've noticed is that there's this theme of decentralization happening, right? So in corporate, it's decentralization of power. Yes, there's technically an organizational hierarchy, but I think Gen Z, I think millennials both together are kind of like, no, we're going to retain our personal power here. We're not going to give up our personal power in the workplace just to get a paycheck. If this is toxic, if this is not aligned, if I don't feel supported or accepted, I'm out. I can go create an online
Did you know you
business.
can just leave? Like, did
You
you know?
can leave, you can quit. So, yeah, I love the insight that you pointed out that millennials have kind of helped that reprogram shift. I think Gen Z is taking it to another level.
Yeah, I think we're still in the middle. right? Because there's some value of the older generation that we still is ingrained in us, right? We believe in the hard work because we did it, right? Like you said, we went and got the degrees, we followed. But I think our challenge was that all the things that were promised did not come. And we're still waiting. And we're like, we still working and I'm supposed to have a house. And I got all the
Lies.
yes, I did all this
Lies.
and I still don't have a house. I still don't, I'm not at a CEO range. I'm not in these spaces that I was told that if I did all these right things, I'm going to get. So I think that is part of where our shift is coming in. And we're also seeing what has happened because of the financial crisis and our parents, grandparents, all these people in these spaces that gave their whole entire life and then at a drop of a hat lost everything just because we're reshifting because we want somebody that doesn't have a degree, we want somebody that has a different creative space. So I think it has shaped how we're moving in spaces where we may have value in certain things and we're going to bring a lot to the table. We're not in the Gen Z space, but we're like, I don't feel, we might not quit the job right now, but we're going to start planning a little bit differently. We're going to be able to call something out and say this doesn't look like it is aligned with the organization mission, and this is outside of my job description, compared to I think the generation before us that is just like all other duties as assigned and I'm going to move with it. And I think that the newer generation is coming in and like detailing like, this looks like it's not supposed to be here in general with my title. So I think we're in that middle space. We are part of the shift, but it's warranted based on what we've been seeing and experiencing. We have not been able to reap the benefits the same way.
Yes, I think our goalposts keep moving, right? And I think so no matter how hard we keep working or how much we achieve, it's like, okay, I got where you told me I needed to be 5 years ago. I worked really hard these last 5 years. And they're like, oh, no, no. In the last 5 years, that goalpost moved. Like you're still just as far away from it as you were before. Keep going. And then we also have older generations who are looking back and saying, like, hey, especially Gen X, I think the like famously forgotten generation, right? Who's looking back at us and saying, like, hold your horses. We didn't even get our turn yet. And I think a lot of that is because of the financial crisis. I think the reason why those goalposts have moved is because the general age in leadership has gotten older. And we're seeing that both in politics and in like the C suite of like large corporations and small companies. People can't retire because they lost their retirement. So they're forced to work until they die, right? Which means they're holding on to leadership with their cold dead fingers, which means the next generation did not get an opportunity to see their same elevation in raising in the ranks, which means we couldn't even get entry level jobs as millennials, right? Like we're all working at like Starbucks and also like Uber Eats and also like, okay, let me like crowdsource my income to live with roommates to try to make ends meet, right? And so I think we've gotten past that point as millennials now, finally, thankfully. But I think that's literally just because people are dying. And we're seeing this in politics where like people are literally dying in office, like while holding office, right? Like they have to work into, well, debatable. They have to work until they die, right? So then that goalpost just keeps moving. And I think this is an interesting thing for Gen Z because I think then with the boom of the internet, they watched this happen to millennials because we posted about it all over Tumblr and Reddit and MySpace and TikTok when TikTok first became. And so Gen Z is watching this happen on the internet like a car crash. And they're like, no, thank you. I grew up in schools with school shootings and I'm watching millennial. Like none of this is working for me. I don't want to be part of any of this. I opt out. Like I just full force opt out of all of this. So that's what I've always like been thinking. That's what I've been feeling. And then selection happened and Gen Z far and away voted for this administration. So I'm curious, like, I mean, do you guys think my assessment of the generations is delusional? Like what where did that come from? How do we go from opting out to like supporting the old guy? Like where did that come from?
Yeah, I think it's less supporting the old guy, and I think it's more like what are the fears that the different parties have? Like what are the fears that are motivating people who voted one way versus another? And then how is that being communicated? I think the younger generation is online more, and this election was so influenced by social media. Like we're probably going to look back in history and be like, holy shit, like this election was very different than all the other elections past. And I think it was more preying on more like emotion and and media than it was like valid political arguments,
Yeah, I even
like you said.
noticed my boys aren't Gen Zs clearly because they're only 18 and 15, but how involved they got. I don't follow politics, right? I'm just like, no, not here for it. But how involved they got, and then they were really looking at the trends of like, oh, this happened, and now this is happening, and now I see this on TikTok. And like you said, it was all over social media. And that really influenced. And me and my son were having a conversation. He goes, yeah, I don't see no point in ever voting again because he's like, it feels like it's all rigged now. So he had a completely different perspective where he was so diehard, like, I'm going to vote, I'm going to vote. And then switched to like, yeah, I don't think I'll ever vote again. So it's
That would be
very
so
interesting to
sad.
see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that is a perfect example though of what I see in Gen Z, because so I have, and I would say I don't know the years per se, but I would say 18 feels like the cusp to me. But I feel like my stepkids are in their early 20s. So my youngest is 20 and oldest 25. And they all voted, and they're pretty like politically and history minded. They were raised in a very political family. So I think that definitely like influences their perspective, to your point, Emily, about like how you're raised compared to your generation per se. But I think that what I witnessed with them is all three of them went to college and in less than 2 years dropped out of college. They were like, this is expensive. I don't see the value. This feels like a waste of my time. I'd rather get started working. And it's not like that worked to their detriment, because my oldest bought her first house at 21. Like,
Whoa.
I don't own a home, but she bought a house at 21. And for her, that there was an ability to jumpstart her life, not wanting to follow in the footsteps of making the quote unquote same mistakes her parents did, who are right on the cusp of Gen X and millennial, right? So witnessing that and saying like, nope, I don't want to be in the rental market. Nope, I don't want to collect degrees to sit on the wall to still be fighting to make my bills each month. That's how I was raised, by college educated parents who counted every dollar. Like, what's the point? What's the point in going to college? And that, it's fascinating to me as a degree collector myself. I would
Mhm.
continue going to college if ever, if that was an option. So that, and my husband's the same way. So it floored us to watch all three of them drop out. But I think it's the same kind of thing as like, well, I don't really see the point in voting. It's like, if the system, I'll try it. If the system doesn't work for me, tap out. Like, I'm not interested. That's interesting.
Think also about the jump between Gen X and Gen Z and now Gen Alpha. Completely different worlds that these two groups grew up in. So if you now imagine a college classroom, you have someone Gen X teaching, you have Gen Z in the room. It's like I see the biggest difference between them is just like they can't communicate. Different worlds, different ways of using the English language. I mean, skibbity is a word. I think now that's even like out of trend. So it's wild differences.
I think higher ed doesn't, I mean, my day job is in higher ed. I teach college freshmen and it's a different world, right? They speak in a different language. They understand and they process through social media, like legit through the internet. So I think that the challenge is that higher education doesn't move, right? Higher education is still archaic in its way of providing education. So you have still professors that I am the professor and I am the one that went to school and I am Dr. So-and-so and I'm going to stand up here and I don't teach, I profess, and that is it. And of course, you're going to have this generation sitting there like, this doesn't make sense. This is not applicable to the job I'm going to do or my life, and I'm going to walk out. So it becomes very hard unless you're willing to understand, okay, we want them to get here, but you have to meet them where they are. And what part of this is actually going to be applicable to the world that they live in, right? That the work that they do. I teach when women gender lives in society under the women gender department. So I apply that to every year. If you're a business student here, this is why this is important. And this is the population and this is the lens that you need. But you have to do that. And it is more work, right? To figure out their language, to find TikTok videos that relate to the topic. Because we had a whole conversation about man versus bear, right? And because that is in the context that they were going to understand it. And then connecting that to theory and other things. But if we don't do that in education, of course, they're not going to see it. But they value different things, right? There's a level of freedom that is valued differently, of peace, of health. So we're looking at sometimes buying a home early and putting in the work now so you can do, but we see them moving into tiny homes and being more of a minimalist, or living, traveling and spending, doing all these things that we were promised that we were going to get at some point, but they're like, that may never happen. Let me enjoy and do the things that I want now.
Yeah.
And I think they're smart for doing that, right? As long as they have a plan and they're okay. But I think there's so much judgment from the older generation. But I think it's more resentment because they didn't get it and they didn't do it.
Yep.
So question then. So what are the implications of this? Because we have this generation that's opting out. We have a generation coming up behind them that is going to have even less buy-in in the system, right? The quote unquote, the system. We've already got post-COVID, these massive corporate buildings, corporate real estate that's sitting empty. That's like people are having to that are stuck in these 5, 10, 15, 20-year leases that are or own buildings that are forcing their workforce back to work because they have to fill the building because the buildings are sitting empty. Now, I know everyone on this call could come up with a lot of uses for that real estate that would be working toward the benefit of humanity, and maybe that's the answer. But like, so eventually, these people who are gripping on to leadership with their old wrinkly hands are going to be out, right? Because eventually they're going to pass. So then, like, if we have entire generations of people who refuse to participate in the quote unquote system, what does that mean for the future of work? Like, how is that going to look?
I think it's going to evolve in a lot of different ways. And the way I see it is one, it's going to evolve in the way that leaders show up and lead, because now, especially in the Gen Z, like they'll just go to a different job, right? Or they'll start their own business. So if they don't like the leadership style, then they're just going to move and go somewhere else. And I think the businesses and the corporations that really take a look at their leadership to see if they are looking at all generations in their workforce, those are going to be the companies that are going to be ahead of the game. Those are going to be the companies that are going to actually stay in the game. Those companies that decide not to look at that and we've always done it this way, we're going to continue to do it this way, they're going to get left behind. And I think it's going to cost them on the talent side. And then also, if you look at on the flip side, if you've had someone in a leadership position for years, they have all this knowledge, and then we go into that, well, I don't want to share my knowledge, and they go into that gatekeeping where they don't want to share the knowledge to the next generation or to the next person that's coming into that role. That's going to hurt them as well. So there's multiple facets there, and I think it will depend on each company on how they decide to handle it.
I think we're going to see new systems entirely. And I think, like AI, for instance, it's going to change everything. We might not even have computers. We might not need a keyboard. We might look at a keyboard in the future and be like, this is archaic. Like, haha, remember the flip phone? Like, this is the next one. So I think organizations are just going to completely change in their working style and communication. And I don't know what that looks like. I just know that it's inevitable because we've seen how the internet's changed everything. And I think AI is just as powerful. I think that means jobs are going to look different. People are going to do different things. I think there's going to be more emphasis on people like prompt engineers, so like people using AI to do functions instead of the end function. I think Gen Z is like, if there's any signal, it's like Gen Z is on social media. So they are the ones that marketing teams want to hire because they're chronically online. So, yeah, I think it's just going to look different. And then it's how do we still hold on to the wisdom of our elders, of Gen X, because there are certain principles that even if systems change, technology changes, and we change in the way that we work, certain principles are still going to be true. And so it's understanding what are those principles and then how do we continue to adapt?
If we look at the workspace that we entered, it looks completely different. And we've been through normal progression, right? And looking at what COVID has done, right, to sped things up. But agreed with AI and everything else that is coming, I can't imagine. I have a 2-year-old and a 13-year-old. I cannot imagine the workforce that they're going to enter. I
Yeah.
can't and I don't know if we have the skills to prepare them, right? Because if higher education is still being so archaic and we're figuring out as we go, it creates all these challenges. And I don't think that I think it is about teaching our leaders part of in my additional hat, right? I founded the Fearless Impact Collective of training middle managers, right? Because that's where it is. That's the backbone. Yes, you have the people up here, but your backbone is your middle management and how to be multilingual across generations and culture. Because I think that even though we're having all these political challenges, I think we're going to enter an even more diverse workforce, right? And we're looking at diverse from different cultures, especially with the shifts in our generation, but also in ages, right? And what does that look like when my style has to be able to transcend in communication to all? I can no longer have a staff meeting with a couple PowerPoints and X, Y, and Z. You're going to have to find ways to be able to do that. So I think the organizations and the industries that are going to be able to excel are the ones that can acknowledge that and can start the training now. How do we prepare for the AI coming into the space, even though there isn't a sign, right, that it's here, but we know that it's going to, and how do we become incorporate it and make it part of what we're doing so it doesn't take over? How do we train for that? How do we train our middle managers that are the translator between high management and direct lines? I think those are the industries that are going to be okay. It's still with the major shift, but I think the spaces that are like, well, AI doesn't impact us, or we've done what we've done and this is what works, then we're going to lose a whole lot more because there is so much value in what was happened before. There was a reason why it was done, right? The Rolodex was needed in the old computer. There was value to that, and there's lessons. But yeah, I think we're having a challenge of where's this data going to be kept, and who's going to help, because things repeat itself. So it might be a new system, but the skill is a skill. The soft skill will always be the same soft skill, and that's I think what we're going to lose the most of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you all talked about a lot of interesting points, and I'm just going to pick like one little tiny thread out of all of that. But I was thinking about the kind of DEI perspective because, of course, right now politically we're seeing this like disintegration of DEI programs from the federal government, which then a lot of corporations are following suit, and of course, any organization that benefits from federal funding is being forced or at least threatened. That's again debatable, but about their funding to end DEI, and that looks like all kinds of things like erasure from websites, let alone like erasure of programming. But I think that what's interesting is a few weeks back on this podcast, we had a DEI expert, Noelle, come in and talk about the rise and fall of DEI programs, right? And one of the things that has really stuck in my brain from that conversation is that she's been working in DEI for, I want to say she said like 12 to 15 years, I don't know, more than 10. And she mentioned that DEI has been like a thing, that like kind of concept, and especially when talking about at work, has been a sort of movement and an initiative for decades. So I think that one of the things that we're seeing when it comes to like, yes, there's a more diverse workforce and that is not going to change, is that there are a lot of quote unquote DEI programs that were just checking boxes, and we're seeing that now, that as stuff is being eliminated, they weren't actually making progress on DEI. But when we look at the grand scope of several like decades, multiple generations of effort toward DEI initiatives, we actually have seen a huge shift in, when we're looking at a 50-year scope or something, we're seeing a huge shift in actual movement and momentum in DEI. That can't be undone because you remove the word Black from your website, right? Like that, I mean, I'm not saying that that's nothing, because it's a really big deal. Like it's a really big deal. And I'm in no way trying to undermine that the erasure that's happening. It does not matter. It absolutely matters. But I think that we are still going to be forced to reckon as workforce and as leaders in business, which those of us on this call, those of us listening to this podcast, like we are leaders in business, thought leaders in business, and working, especially the work that we've talked about that you guys are doing, working with other generations, coming generations, like there's leadership there, and leadership has to reckon with the fact that diversity matters. So yeah, I think that's a big one.
I think that what we can see, what this all has shed a light on, is that people were checking off boxes, like you said, because if it's this easy for you to erase and remove, then it wasn't part of the system, right? You could have had it on your website for 15 years and say, we have programs for mentoring women, and we make sure that we bring in a diverse group, and this is what our screening process. But if you can say to backspace and delete and remove it off a website and it's not integrated in the system, then it was never doing the work that was supposed to. And yes, right, we have to acknowledge some progress has been made, but again, if we can delete it this quickly and we're still having the challenges as women, right? And I always talk about the intersection when we're talking about being a woman of color, a woman that is Black presenting, a woman with curly, like big hair. You're looking at someone that's first gen, the barriers continue. And what ends up happening is that there is space for one or two of us in the room, right? And there is of what is considered palatable as a Latina or someone that is a Black woman or part of any other marginalized community. So I think it becomes a bigger challenge. I think it's so disheartening when it's just like, okay, we removed it off their website. We did this to fall in line, and how you can see who fought. And the people that I think are fighting, that are standing 10 toes down, it's because it was really part of their organization, because they were really doing the work. And to say, yes, I'm going to just do what I'm being told is going to dismantle more systems than what it needs to. But those that were able, like, okay, you know what, they right, and we're just falling in line. You never really cared. You were all.
Yes. And I want to say too, one of the things that I've been kind of talking about and thinking about with all of this conversation going on about in erasing DEI is that, like, Google Calendar taking Black History Month off of Google Calendar sucks. That sucks. But also, the quote unquote real work wasn't putting a label on the calendar. The real work was people learning more about Black history. Now, if that has been successful, and that's a question mark, right? But if that has been successful, then taking that line off the calendar doesn't change what we already spent the last however many years learning. If we have been doing trainings in workforces, especially with corporate leadership, to talk about inherent bias, to learn about our biases, etc., then not offering those workshops anymore sucks. However, it doesn't change what we hopefully learned during those workshops. Now, did we actually learn anything in those workshops is a big question, right? And I think that's what we're going to see, because if checking a box is not enough anymore to qualify as, look at me, I'm doing DEI, pat myself on the back, like I get federal funding, or now I'm eligible for federal funding. If that's not enough anymore, then that means that we're going to actually see who did institutionalize and systematize their DEI practices. If you changed the way you hire, if you changed your culture to make it an inclusive and welcoming space for all people, then you already have a diverse workforce. And if you don't, those check marks were not working anyway, right? Like, so that's actually kind of interesting. But I think this generation, coming back around to the generational part, I think this generation is going to be a more diverse workforce, and that diverse, and they're identifying with their diversity, right? Whereas previous generations, I think, wanted or felt they had to, whether they actually wanted to or not, like become kind of cookie cutter elements. We talked about like cookie cutter leadership doesn't work. Well, that's because you don't have a cookie cutter workforce anymore. And before, we were working toward having a cookie cutter workforce. Now that we've prioritized all this diversity, all this neurodivergence, all of this accessibility, it's like, well, now more people than ever have neurodivergence diagnoses as adults. More people than ever, like we said earlier, are talking about their trauma as adults. Like, if these things are showing up in like, hey, wait, now I have a lot more awareness about this, then leadership has no choice but to reckon with that.
Yeah, and I think that as we look at just in the Gen Z and then also the Gen Alpha, I just think of like my son that's in the Gen Alpha. They're already at a school, like in the school level, they're already identifying differently. Like it's not he, she, right? It's they, them. And there's a respect now that they learn at a very young age. And he has corrected a lot of people to be like, actually, she doesn't identify as she, it's they or it's them. So they're already correcting, some of this Gen Alpha generation is correcting, like, that's not how you approach that. It's their name, or you call them this or that. So they're already doing that education at a young age, under 16 right now, right? So you think about that, and then that going into the workplace, the leaders are going to have to be on board to also understand that on top of everything else, which is kind of mind blowing if we think about the changes.
Yeah, I think it's natural. Like it's going to be as they grow up, it's going to just be a part of organizations, whether or not there's funding or frameworks that a company is supposed to install. It's like, no, this is happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we have people in leadership in the corporate world who refuse to participate in the change, right? To participate in the momentum in that direction, especially if they are part of the cultural shift that's being forced in this country right now. There are a lot of people who are moving with the change in tide of the administration. That is just true. Whether I mean, obviously you know my opinion, I've made that clear, but there are a lot of people moving in that direction. They were quick, right? At the time we're recording this, it's been 2 months that this administration has been in office, and how quickly people in leadership were jumping out of their chairs to follow suit, even people who endorsed the opposition, right? Like, but doesn't matter. Right now they're following the tide. And so depending on how that goes, depending on more than 2 months, right? Maybe we're looking at a year, 2 years, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years. Like, I mean, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds, right? But if this cultural shift goes in this direction as far as like policy goes, et cetera, then we see that trickle down to the leaders in business who do choose to go this way. They don't make the changes that we were just saying they're going to have to. So some will, and then they'll be able to retain top talent or attract top talent or whatever. I think that's definitely true. So for those who can't, what happens, right? So we mentioned, like, I think Emily said people are pursuing more entrepreneurship. I think you're the one who said that. So like, could we have a whole generation? Like, what if pretty much the whole Gen Alpha pursued entrepreneurship? Can we sustain a society that looks like that? Like, what happens? And I'm not posing a direction either way. I'm actually genuinely curious.
I've thought about this because I kind of dug into like philosophy of decentralization, specifically in the financial space, because the financial system, like other systems that we're seeing, it is broken. Like it takes a long time to send money cross border. We're in a much more global environment, so digital assets move faster and they're cheaper. Like it's apparent, right? Cash is going out. We're seeing more digital assets, especially globally. What I think is going to happen is that like yeah, more we might have more entrepreneurs. We might have more business to business than consumer. But I think not everyone can be an entrepreneur for sure. Like there are hobbyists that might call themselves entrepreneurs, but some people just aren't cut out to run their own business. There's a lot of things to keep in mind as a founder. I mean, I work with them all the time and I am one. I've had 4 businesses. I've met lots of people that are passionate about things, but they can't run a business. They don't have the hustle, they don't have the grind to keep up with it. So I've played with the idea of like, okay, what is a decentralized world where most people run their own business and sell to each other? And I think it's possible in certain scenarios, but it would require people to have the entrepreneurial spirit and drive to do that. And that drive has to be more motivating than going to a company and working for them. So I think it's drilling into their desires and what's really motivating them.
And I also think I was actually having this conversation with one of my friends, and he's a black male, and we were talking about the different months and the Black History Month. And he's like, at the end of the day, like, what does that get me? Right. And we were talking about the divide, right? And the more we see these generations come up and these corporations and with the election and now who runs the country, there could also be a very significant divide, more of a divide to where, no, we're going to take this stand and we're going to stand here because that's what we choose to stand in. And that's where we choose to stand. And then the other direction, no one else is going to take that stand and go the other direction. Because you've seen just on Threads, for example, you've seen the amount of people that are now not going to Target, not going to these different stores, and they're supporting different things just because of the DEI. So what happens if something else comes to light? And we all know, like, if we look at astrology, this is the year where a lot of truth comes to the surface, a lot of truth. And so the more we see truth come to the surface, the more people are like, oh, they have the awareness now. So that could also create more of a divide depending on what else happens.
One quick comment of just what Sarah said about like the tide, like leaders jumping ship, like moving with the tide. There is also an unseen tide that just hasn't emerged yet. So we're only 2 months in. There's a lot of time left, and I think another tide is going to rise up.
I agree. I was going to say, I think instead of considering it a divide, I think it's going to be more in alignment. I think there's going to be this space of this is who I align with and this is who I do business with. And it will be so much more clear than just what we're doing now that, yes, we're trying to avoid Target and we're trying to do this. I think that there's going to be some formalization of this alignment of these are the spaces that we support because of X, Y, and Z. And that's going to be on the two at different spectrums, no different than we are for the DEI and this and that and supporting small business. But I think that we're going to see that same level of alignment on the other spectrum. And I think that's what it's going to create, which I think in parts is heartbreaking, but at the same time, it gives us for the space for more of those that are entrepreneurs, more of those that are looking to rise to have the opportunity to do so, because those are the people that you're going to want to support instead of looking at the big corporations or even the small business that says, hey, I'm 10 toes down in the complete opposite. You can go do that in your corner over there, but I'm not getting services from you. I'm not buying from you. This is why I'm supporting. And we go back to community, which is what we all thrive from, right? So I think that's what it's going to create. And for at least one part of the group is going to be like, okay, this is what you offer, and I'm going to support you. And then I'm going to spread the word about what Sarah does. And then, okay, Sarah's going to connect me to Emily, and Emily has this. And this is the space that we're going to be in a much more cohesive, collaborative space. And that's what I'm hoping, right? We could all go run and go to hell. But
I think, yeah. And I think that's a really nice place to kind of like soft land the conversation, although we could talk about it for weeks and months to come. Of course we will. But I think that as small business owners, we also at some point need teams. So we need to hire people. So if everyone wanted to be an entrepreneur, there's also like I mean, we have to answer for that to be able to accommodate, like, I'm not building the same thing we're trying to leave. And that's like the whole premise of Big Brave Business. And I really hope that this conversation helped you on the call challenge some of those things for yourself and like hope that there's things that you'll take from this conversation that you're going to like marinate on. And for you listening, I hope that that's true too. All right. That's what I love about this podcast is how much I learn and how much I think it makes me a better leader in business. And I just appreciate all three of you so much and your time. I like to end all of these conversations with the same question. It can be work related, but it does not have to be. So what is something that is making you happy right now?
For me, it's living what I once dreamed my life to be.
That's huge. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Nice.
I was going to say,
I love the question. It's so sweet. I think for me, it's connecting with women like you all. Like I work with women entrepreneurs. I'm so passionate about women and having these conversations. Like, let's get into it. Let's talk about the real things. Let's stay connected because there's so many reasons to feel helpless and alone. And like, let's not feed those. Let's feed into the reality that is we're all here and existing, and we have power when we connect.
yes, I'm with Emily. I'm working through and doing a lot of the stuff that I prayed for to be able to have these conversations, to be able to continue to do the work that is important to me. So right now, I think that's what it is.
I love that. And yeah, I think to your point about like, let's get into it and let's have these conversations. I think it's really amazing how much we have to say, how much smart, interesting material we have to offer. And so I think spaces like this that just really like amplify voices are just so important now more than sometimes. But it's always been true. That's always been true to that there's voices that need more amplification. So I think that is making me happy because even though there's a part of me, and I'm sure you can relate to this, that has this constant pressure of like the elephant in the room of the hard stuff. I do feel so motivated for like my mission and my purpose of what I'm doing with my own business and what I'm doing and who I get to work with and who I get to meet and who I get to talk to. And I'm like, okay, keep going the course. Like this work is I'm so proud. And I can also see the marked progress in my life and in my business that I have made. I can see the leaps and bounds of progress that I'm making for myself. And that feels so good. And like work I'm truly proud of putting into the world. And so much of the work I do is about amplifying other voices. And so like that feels so good. Even though that elephant is always there, right? Sitting on your chest, like not just in the room, sitting on your chest, literally. Like, I don't know, it's a lot, but in the midst of all of that, my mission, and I think again, I know you can relate to this, my mission feels stronger than maybe I've been in business 5.5 years, and I think like stronger than it's been this whole time. I've always felt strongly about it, but stronger than ever, like so good about this mission and this work and the direction and what more I can do. And that actually feels really good. So that's making me happy. But thank you all for being here. If you want to connect with them, in the description of the episode or the show notes, you can get all of our bios and links to connect with us. Of course, you want to connect with everyone on this call. But thank you so much for being here, and to you listening. We'll see you next week.